Cool, so I was meant to be talking about George's marvellous medicine. I'm not. So, I'm talking about how to win with automation and influence people. So, a little bit about me. I'm from Leeds in the UK, but not originally. I'm originally from Australia, and I've wanted to come to Norway since I was 10. I went to the Epcot Centre in Disney World, and they had loads of trolls, and so I thought that Norway was full of trolls, and obviously it is, as I can see you all here now, but it's been excellent. Fred took us to Midsummer party, and there was a bonfire, and there were children screaming because it was far too hot, and they were getting burnt, and that was great. So, Norway is awesome. So, I'm a principal test engineer at Sky in Leeds, which is a media company. So I organise the Leeds Testing Atelier with these crew, although Fred doesn't anymore, although Fred and Christian are coming over for the next one. And thank you for Fred and Christian for having me. It's really cool. So if you're ever over in Leeds way, give us a shout and we'll hang out. I won't take you to a bonfire because we're not really that into burning things in England, except for Guy Fawkes. We actually are really into burning things, so I guess everyone's into burning things. So I wrote the title of this talk, and then I realised that I should actually read the book that it's based on, which is How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a really awesome book from the 1930s by a chap called Dale Carnegie. Is that right? Carnegie. Carnegie. So he was an American writer and lecturer on how to be a better person in work and life as well. So I listened to the original 1980s recording on Audible, and it's absolutely beautiful. There's a guy with a really old school American voice that narrates it, and it's really pretty, so I really recommend it. So I'm going to be using some of Dale's teachings here, so have a look for slides that look like this. These are his quotes, they're not me. So, how this all started. So, I had an interview with the other senior tester that was there and the principal engineer. So when I went to the interview, I asked what frameworks they used because I want to know what I'm going to be working with. And I hate a lot of things. So the frameworks included Spock, Scala Test, Thucydides, which is now Serenity, JBehave, JUnit, Mocha, Karma, and Cucumber. So there was a lot, and I don't know all of these. So I also asked what languages were used. So I'm a total C# kid, but they used Groovy, Java, and Scala. They actually wrote APIs in Groovy, which is batshit, because Groovy is weird. So it sounded like a total mess, but I'm quite into that because it means it won't be boring. It's going to be pretty fun. But it was totally even worse than it sounded. So I joined the front-end team at first. So what we had to comprise all of Identity, which was the team I was in, we had 2 front-end teams and there was a back-end team. So all 3 were APIs, but both front ends were proxy APIs. So the front end that I joined also had a clunky website as well. So it was a clunky website and an API. Both were written in Groovy because these bastards were sick. So the front end, I had the API and the website, and it was total world of Groovy, and also a world of Siren JSON. So Siren JSON is too long to put vertical, that's why it's sideways. This is a taste of Siren JSON. It's Helios, so it'll direct the user where to go after each interaction. But as you can probably think about, writing automation for this is pretty difficult. It's really difficult to navigate around, and yeah, writing DTOs for this is quite terrifying. So when we looked into the tests, we discovered that there were absolutely no acceptance test layers running as part of the build. Instead of acceptance tests, they had these magical functional tests, which covered a whole lot of different layers of testing. So when people say functional tests, it's possible that you're going to encounter some issues. They also had integration tests. So these were strangely the functional tests, but they were written instead of a mock, they were actually testing against the real system. So the tests at both layers were exactly the same because they were both written by the developers, which caused so they were just totally duplicated. No one could actually agree what these functional tests were, and so it caused loads of arguments as well. So if you encounter this situation, I really recommend getting the naming of the test layers sorted as quickly as possible so people don't just argue about it all the time. So what really happened here is we had a whole lot of slow running, flaky tests. So at the start of my time there, we had a whole load of image changes. And so we had 2 front-end developers working on making really simple changes, and they were checking in their work. We had tests running on the build server, and but the issue here was the tests would take half an hour to run. So because they were flaky as well, they'd fail. It would sometimes require 4 reruns to get the test to pass, even though the developers knew that they hadn't actually changed anything of any importance. So it would have been really easy to exclude these tests so you could actually get your code out there. But if we did that, everyone would start doing it. So that kind of sucks. So don't encourage this kind of behavior, excluding the tests. Encourage the fixing. So this was really bad for the developers. But when I first looked into how we were actually going to release these tests as a tester, it was looking even worse. So there were some UI layer tests for the website that were written in Thucydides over the top of JBehave. So Thucydides and JBehave are both BDD frameworks. So how anyone layered these on top of each other is totally beyond me. But it was really terrible, and it was really difficult to navigate around. And yeah, so I looked into Jenkins at these tests, and they hadn't been run in over 1.5 years as well. So they weren't actually telling us anything because they weren't running. And we had absolutely no idea of how most of the system was meant to work, as there were no unit tests and there were no working UI level tests. So changing things was really terrifying. The release system was that we released an RPM to the test environments, and then 2 testers spent 2 days manually testing the different components. So I'm really lazy. My testers and I were having lunch one time, and we were talking about how we test differently. So one of them is so thorough, he's really cool. One of them's so-so, and I'm cowboy as fuck. Like, there's no way I'm gonna sit there testing an application for 2 days when it shouldn't be like that. I want to get stuff out there fast, and I want to know that what I'm testing actually works. So there were also some smoke tests which were written in Groovy, but they couldn't be run on the Jenkins box because someone had upgraded Firefox on the Jenkins box, and they hadn't upgraded Firefox in the tests. So these had to be run manually on your machine, and you had to ensure that you had the right version of Firefox. So at the time, Firefox 46 was out in the wild, and these tests ran on Firefox 31, so it was really old. And also, we had to upgrade Thucydides to Serenity. They changed the name of the thing because no one can say Thucydides. I couldn't. I had to Google it and learn how to say it so many times. But yeah, there were only 13 of these tests. So as you can imagine, we had a test team that was totally champing at the bit by this stage to actually get to try some automation and get it up and running. And they all had different opinions on how they wanted to do it. So as testers, we generally write any language, although of course we have our favorites. So the mix that we had was we had 2 Ruby testers, we had 2 C# testers, which I was one of, we had 1 Java tester, and we had 1 Python tester. So everyone thinks their language is the best because C# is totally the best. But we needed a framework that absolutely everyone would use and everyone would be comfortable with as well. So what we did was we threw down a challenge. So we needed to write these smoke tests, and the best way was to throw down a challenge. So we'd write them in our different languages, and that we'd chosen, and we'd present it back to the team. So we had a mix of Cucumber, Ruby, and Selenium, Gauge, Java, Selenium, Cucumber, Java, Selenium, and Cucumber, Python, Selenium. So we gave everyone a week to do it in. This meant that everyone had a totally fair chance on building their frameworks to show everyone else. Now, when I said to show everyone else, this is where it became really unfair, and I didn't think of it until it was actually happening. So we didn't mention that part of building the framework meant that you had to show it to everyone else at the end. And the team that I was in was really quite large, so there was about 60 of us. There were developers, Scrum Masters, DevOps, even though DevOps shouldn't be a team, but anyway, that's a different story. So the tester that built the framework the best, she was a really good developer, and she was by far the best developer and could understand how to actually build frameworks. She was writing it in a language that she knew really well as well, so she was writing it in Python, and she is badass Python dev. But she had a really unfair disadvantage. She's really, really shy. And so she doesn't enjoy getting up in front of people. So Python wasn't going to be chosen as a language because she couldn't actually get up and sell it. So when you're setting a challenge like this, make sure it's fair. Her option really didn't stand a chance. Merely stating a truth isn't enough. The truth has to be made vivid, interesting, and dramatic. You have to use showmanship. The movies do it, television does it, and you'll have to do it too if you want attention. So, back to the presentations. We showed our different frameworks and we explained the benefits of each. So, if you haven't heard of Gauge, it's an open source tool to write test cases in. It's really similar to Cucumber, except it doesn't need to follow the given when then pattern, which is really good because I don't like the given when then pattern because I haven't heard anyone speak like that in my life. So I don't see why I should have to write my tests like that. So it's just clean language. The only way that I can get you to do what you want, anything, is by giving you what you want. So Gauge also has some really amazing reporting. And working with developers, I knew that developers loved the reporting from Gauge. So Cucumber reports at the time were really quite clunky, and they weren't as easy to follow as Gauge. I also knew that we had a bunch of JVM developers in the room, so even if they focused on Groovy or Scala instead of Java, but Java would most likely win because it was still in the JVM. So we all voted as a team, and we ended up choosing Gauge and Java as the framework. Perhaps a little bit of showmanship worked there, or maybe I just knew what developers particularly liked, or maybe it was the right framework to use. Doesn't matter. But it ended up that we had the developers on board with what we were going to be using across the board to write the new framework in. Arouse in the other person an eager want. So it's really funny because testers seem to get to write a lot more code than developers, especially when you're backfilling test cases. So here we asked for help from the developers, and they assisted us with improving the test cases so much. So we made our code way more fun to write than the developers as well. They were doing really boring stuff like image changes. We were writing a whole new framework. So this really encouraged cross-discipline pairing, which built a stronger team. So we had these smoke tests written, but of course these were completely the smallest of our worries. The smoke test didn't stop the testers from having to perform 2 days of testing for a product. The smoke tests really gave us diddly squat, as they actually ran, even if they only ran on your machine. But they were a really easy part of the system to tackle, which is why we chose that. But the actual chunk of tests that were really important to stop us from doing those 2 days worth of testing were the horrific JBehave Thucydides tests, which weren't running and hadn't been running for over a year and a half. But these were really hard to tackle. God damn, they were almost impossible. So we'd had loads and loads of people look at these, probably about 6 all up, from different disciplines. We had performance testers look at them because they were more code heavy, and no one could solve it because they were so impenetrable in their messiness. So we decided to tackle something else for the meantime. Also, fixing the UI tests weren't for the benefits of the whole team. And there was only one team that actually had a UI as well. The rest of the team, so the proxy API and the API layer for the core system, wouldn't have benefited from the UI tests at all. We wouldn't have been able to share knowledge of how we were actually building the tests. So we started on the API acceptance tests. Unfortunately, though, this wasn't done in the same manner as we did choosing the frameworks. So this was done as a bit more of a solo endeavour, and the problems from this are still around. So don't choose technology as a solo. Also, the problem here was I was writing the API test for a system that used JSON, and JSON, which, as I said before, is really, really complex, and DTOs are really difficult to use for it. So for our project, we used JSON path, which is kind of like XPath, but for JSON, where the other testers had a lot nicer JSON to work with, so they used JSON or Jackson. And this caused all kinds of headaches. So this was pretty much our largest mistake with these frameworks, and we are still paying for it. I left that team 6 months ago, and they're still having these problems. So they were looking into JSONiter to solve this, because we needed to start from scratch in regards to a deserializer, because you'd be surprised at how attached people get to their libraries. People really like JSON or Jackson. It doesn't matter, it's a fucking library. But we'll need to replace it entirely. So the only way to get the best out of an argument is to avoid it. We aren't going to solve this problem by people shouting each other down saying that JSON or Jackson is better. And in the end, who actually cares? Just start anew. Libraries move on and get better. Sell the new and don't dwindle on the old. On the topic of JSONiter, the way that we found out about JSONiter is through the ThoughtWorks tech radar. So Ash, I hired him as a contractor because I could for some reason, but yeah. But he spends an hour a month reviewing the ThoughtWorks tech radar to see what cool and new and exciting tools have come about. So we use the tech radar for more than this though. We've implemented the tech radar, so choices like this, you know, the different JSON deserializers won't actually bite you in the end. Any proposals for new tools have to come through the tech radar, which is looked at once a week by the entire development team. That means that people won't just bring in new libraries all the time. If someone wants to use a new library, they need to submit it and you all need to review it. Makes things a lot easier. So when we review pull requests that don't meet what's on the tech radar, we can reject them for this reason and therefore keep our code base clean and coherent. And as I mentioned earlier, the front end of the system had almost no unit tests, which was causing really long build times as the functional tests were written instead of the unit tests. So what's most surprising here was the developers actually had to be trained in how to write unit tests, which was really weird. So quite a few of the developers had actually never written unit tests before. And the idea of unit tests had to be sold to them. I found this absolutely bizarre at the time, but apparently it's more common than you think. So talk in terms of the other person's interest. So we had to discuss with the developers what a unit test was, and why it was a good idea to actually write a unit test, why refactoring without unit tests is scary, and what guidelines we had for unit tests. Focusing on refactoring meant that developers understood how doing this would help them, and it wouldn't seem like a lot of work for a little bit of payoff. The front-end API was notoriously difficult to work in as it was Groovy, and Groovy uses a lot of Groovy magic. So touching one piece of code would change another dimension without you even realizing. So what we had to do was we had to make what a unit was really, really clear. So unit tests should cover isolated bits of code. If code is inherited from another class, do not test that class in the inheritance. Component tests should cover this. Derived classes, we are just testing change code. So it may differ for your company. You need to agree what a unit test is with everyone. So you'll remember at the start, I stated at the start, we had functional tests and integration tests that were exactly the same without mocks. Don't do that, that's really silly. And we had to, code reviews had to include the inclusion of unit tests. So we had to make sure that people were actually writing unit tests. It was really quite a strange experience explaining unit tests to developers, but it was really worth it. So don't assume that people will understand everything, because you'll find that sometimes they won't, but due to cultural differences, or maybe they're just shy or scared, people won't pipe up and ask what you actually mean. It took us a long time, well, it took me a long time to find out that people didn't understand unit testing. So, which brings us to another section. While I was messing around with that component, there were some really large problems going on within another component, which was the back end of the system. So there were constant arguments about two sets of tests, which were the cucumber tests and the gauge tests. The developers in this team, they were pretty organised. So they had integration tests, which were actual integration tests, and they had testers writing the acceptance tests. So the cucumber tests were the integration tests. And we had 2 testers on this project, but then due to a whole load of circumstances, we ended up with none. So it was about this point in time that it became really apparent that component teams weren't working. I'd moved into the other front-end team, and it was really interesting as I was so far away from this team that I had to work out how the entire part of this system worked. People were in the same tribe, working on pieces of software without knowing how another component that it interacted with worked at all. And it wasn't just the testers that had this problem, it was the developers as well. And the developers were writing different languages, and if someone was sitting over the other side of the office, there was a fair chance that they didn't even know them. So we'd also had a new head of tech join who wanted to make his mark, as they do. And so I got promoted to the test manager as the other senior quit, so I was the only senior left. And we came up with this idea of feature squads on an away day, that we worked together as a leadership team to work out how this would work. So let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. So we came back from this leadership away day, and without any planning whatsoever, one of the Scrum Masters presented this idea of feature squads. So this was a fucking disaster. This was beyond a disaster. There were pretty much riots. The way it was presented was in this overcomplicated diagram, which is really funny to look at, isn't it? Really shit. But the way everyone thought it was really ridiculous, because look at it, it's ridiculous, because it was totally forced upon them. So we set up working groups to discuss how we could actually implement feature squads. The working groups identified issues that could come from working in feature squads, and we came back together to see how we could actually present it to the team, actually prepared this time. Dramatize your ideas. So who here has seen the infomercial for Hello Nasty, the Beastie Boys album? A few of you saw my talk in Talon, so I guess you guys have seen it. But this is a work of art. It's really overdone, it's ridiculous, and it's absolutely brilliant. So this is going to cut the stream, but here's a clip. Hang on, I think I need to unplug it. Oh my God. Oh my God, look. Woo!
The following program is a paid advertisement and expresses the opinions of the producers and not necessarily of this network. The Juice Ladies.
I'm Tag, this is Viv. Did you miss us? And we're here with the studio producer today. We had some trouble last week with the, little racy with raisins. And to rectify those raisins, we had to reduce. But now, everybody knows us because we have fun with fruit. You know what? Let's invite someone here with us. They can share in this juice. I think so. Do we have a volunteer from the audience? Sir, in the front row? What's your name, sir?
My name is John.
Oh, John.
Yeah.
Give that a try. Yeah, give it a try. Okay. Wow! Now we have a surprise for you. We'll love this. Now look what the second machine does. Go on, Bill. You are the second machine. Now this machine is my favorite. What happens when we push this button is this.
Okay, so, one moment. Okay, so, come on. Can you believe I worked in IT support for like 3 years and I'm still having trouble? I think that should do it. Oh, I know, I didn't plug this in. Yeah, that one. So, this should work. Yeah. Okay, so we were sitting there discussing how we were going to present this idea back to the team, and I asked the team to watch that. The thing with infomercials is they look into the way of how you're actually meant to sell something. So, how to appeal to your audience? There's actually a really specific formula. And if you have to present something that is this important, that is going to change the way that 60 people work, make sure that you prepare and look into how it's going to appeal to them instead of showing them some shitty diagram. So the structure I followed for this was I had a statement of what the problem was. I said a proposal of the solution. I got some testimonials. It was really funny because the Scrum Master got me the testimonials, but he got me the testimonials like 5 minutes before I had to present it. And some of the testimonials weren't too great, but you know, they were still testimonials. Concerns of the proposed solution and how the solution takes care of the concerns. And repetition of the solution. So you always need to repeat the solution. That's how you really get people on board. So everyone knew that I was using really cheap selling techniques, but I made it fun. So it ended up that everyone agreed to work in these feature teams because we'd prepared ourselves to sell the idea this time. And we also included people in the discussions with these working groups. So we helped them feel that the idea was actually theirs as well, instead of just pushing it on them. So by this point, we had people working across different components, and we had people writing tests, thank God. And I was managing the testers, so I'd actually been able to start coaching them and mentoring them a bit. So it was by this point that we received the news that we were going to have the bigwigs coming up from London. So I'm in Leeds, and people don't usually come and visit you when you live in the north of England because they think it's a shithole when it's not. But so it's really nice when people from London actually come up and visit you. So you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by getting other people interested in you. So we were told that we were going to have an hour with these bigwigs. And with that, we had to present the technology strategy and the feature team strategy and the testing strategy as well. So I really didn't do this all by myself. I worked with a principal engineer who had noted what these higher-ups actually wanted, so we could actually sell what they wanted back to them. So what was really cool was you could find all of what they were interested in their newsletters. And so he based his technology strategy around that, which worked really perfectly. So he knew what their interests were, and they absolutely loved that we'd bothered looking them up. So I wasn't that lucky, of course, because these people really hated testing. They just thought it was an expensive waste of time. Apparently it was quite a big sell to actually get testers in at the time. So I had to do things a bit differently. So make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. So when the higher ups were coming, I was actually really excited. I hadn't met them before, and if you have them on your good side, it means that you could probably get funding for your projects. So this was a pretty good opportunity to make a good impression on them. So I brought cake. Brought cakes, I brought chocolate, I brought biscuits, I brought loads of shit like that. So people really fucking love cake. So if you have a visitor, provide food. Make them feel welcome and like you're excited to see them. I was, but cake totally cemented that. Actions speak louder than words. And a smile says, I like you. You make me happy. I'm really glad to see you. So look at them in their eyes. Shake their hands. Smile. I tend to do this. Don't do this. I get really intense. So like try and calm your tits if you're a bit like that. So they might get paid more, but it doesn't mean that they don't want to feel comfortable. Smile and make them feel welcome. Remember that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. So there were only 3 people that we were actually presenting this to. If you're presenting an idea to a small group of people, call them out by name. Say how wonderful it is to have them there, because it is. They've taken time out of their schedule to come and see you. Make them feel like it was actually worth it. So, although these people didn't really care that much about testing, they left that room happy, and they listened to me because I made them feel important. And I thought that they were important because they took some time out of their day to come and see me. So, here's the test strategy that I presented to them. Use it for what you want if you want. So, this is Identity's test strategy. My name's Gwen Diagram. I'm in the Identity tribe. First off, I'm going to start off with a basic theory of why we test. Testing creates confidence that your product works, or perhaps the avoidance of doubt that your product will break. Sky should be a synonym for quality. We want to ensure that customers can log on to the platform at any time, whether it to be watch Friends at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday or to watch Game of Thrones at 9 p.m. on a Monday night. The Identity platform should always be available, frictionless, and secure for the customer. Via performance, load, security, and automated testing, we can create a Sky product that can be deployed quickly with known quality. Testing also ensures that we are delivering software of value. By aligning with the business on what scenarios are expected within the application, we can deliver a journey-driven solution which adds value to the product. But really, why test? Stable system isn't just for the customers. Working in the Spotify model, it isn't only the ops team on call. Team members from all disciplines are on call. Creating a stable, tested piece of software means that your life is easier as a member of the Identity team, so you won't be the one getting woken up at 2 a.m. to keep the system up. It's all very well and good wanting a system that is stable with a minimum amount of show-stopping bugs, but how do we actually create a quality system? Identity want to look at the testing pyramid a little bit differently. We would like to reimagine the testing pyramid instead as a bug filter. Only bugs unable to be found by the prior component of testing will be able to reach the next stage of testing. We will cover unit, component, integration, acceptance, end-to-end, and exploratory testing. In the future, I would like to align the bug filter to our continuous deployment pipelines. Unit testing will be the layer with the largest amount of tests. Having a large unit testing layer has quite a few benefits. Unit tests are quick to write and run, and they greatly assist when refactoring units of code. If code is written without unit tests, It's very difficult to go back and refactor that code, as the developer will be unable to see if refactoring has broken anything. A component is a test that limits the scope of the exercise software to a portion of the system under test. Component tests will frequently include mocked or stub components, so that the tested functionality can be isolated to the component that the developer is interested in testing. Integration tests cover multiple components and will find issues between multiple components speaking to each other. Acceptance tests will be written to the acceptance criteria on a card and written in clear language that can be reused for business documentation for specific areas of functionality. End-to-end tests cover user journeys and will be the journeys that customers are actually making through the product. Exploratory testing will catch only the most subtle bugs, bugs that haven't been caught via automation. Next, I will be showing you how we're planning to make the Identity Tribe excellent through support and learning. Part of the purpose of the tests are also documentation around the application. The tests create many opportunities for learning, especially sharing knowledge across disciplines. Learning brings us together and builds better bonds within the team. With strengthened communication, we should be able to work in a more cohesive manner to build more cohesive software. Developers and testers pair across the tribe, which promotes cross-learning. The developers learn more about testing, and the testers learn more about development. This also improves quality across the product, as two heads on each part of the process is far better than one. Pairing also allows the sharing of technical knowledge and the development of shared techniques. More consistent code helps remove the mental barrier to exploring a previously written test, allowing the observer to focus on the testing element. Through the Testing Guild, we are building up mentoring relationships with the testers. We want to encourage testers to grow in the right direction. And with an identity, we have many fantastic directions that they can go in. With our team interested in their work, we will be able to deliver better software. We've started chapterships within the tribe in Identity, where we're bringing all the testers, the Scrum Masters and the developers together in their retrospective specialisms to share knowledge and discuss common issues, and solve them together as a team. We've implemented Fat Fridays, where the tribe can work together to solve issues that have occurred during the week. During the Fat Friday times, we solve pressing issues like building of branches, Dockerizing some of the applications, and working on test frameworks. This is also a great place for the team to learn together. While mentoring the testing team members, we can focus on where the individual is at the moment and where they actually want to be. If they're interested in security testing, we can pair them with someone in the tribe who has knowledge and recommend some courses for them, for example. We want our team members to be constantly learning and not only be proud of their work, but to be proud of where they work. So, thank you, especially to Noah Sussman. The testing cone is his concept, and Ash, that's his wheel of testing. If you ask him about it, it's really fun to talk to him about the wheel of testing. He really likes it. So, any questions?
So did you sell it?
Sorry?
So did you sell it?
Yeah, he was really happy. The funny thing is I sold that idea, but that's not how identity actually is. So that's how I wanted it to be. That was like the best thing that I could see. And they're still pissing around, like, you know, they don't have enough unit tests. They don't have enough, like, it's not perfect, nothing's ever perfect, but you can dream. So, yeah.
Bare å spørre på norsk også.
Cool.
Ja.
Thank you. Thank you for your
very
time.
much, Gwen.